Hi, Ty. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. So today we've got Ty. How do I say your last name? Sparafino? Sorry.
Like, is there something that like you're just putting letters in my last name that like
Richard.
I mean, we all can't have the last name Man. I mean,
Oh, Sparaviro.
Smart. Now where are you? Oh, just Ty Vincent. Just Ty Vincent.
Ty Vincent. So Ty Vincent is a psychologist. He's a human behavior specialist. He's also a keynote speaker and has owned CrossFit gyms. So pretty cool, man.
It's called overachiever.
What do you do in your spare time?
I like long walks on the beach and cuddling. No, what do I do in my spare time? Train. I at least try to. I like to read. I don't know. What do I really do in my spare time?
Yeah, that's a busy person answer.
Yeah, it is. I'm like, it really is such a pedantic answer. I think that's what it is. Because when you actually have free time, it's like, what do you do?
Yeah.
But I think coming out of lockdown, when we were, for less than a long period of time, it was this whole narrative that's changed, for our, the way that we train, the way that we look after ourselves, which plays into, as athletes, that I still think to an extent, a lot of us don't know what to do. And, it's when you have pretty much 6 months straight, even though it seems forever ago, of home workouts, and it's this and it's that. And what it is when we look at even performing in front of people again, from a sports aspect, and what you're going to do with your free time and what that looks like. We're kind of like, I do this. If that makes sense, in the sense, and where we're at right now. So free time is relative, but I also just try to have it as downtime, because I work with so many people, doing so many webinars and things of that nature, that the amount of energy I have to put out, sometimes I just want to be like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to stay and do nothing, whatever nothing looks like. So.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what got you here.
Here in Australia or here in general? So my mom and my dad really liked each other. No. So my background is actually in clinical medicine. So in the States, I got my master's. So my undergraduate's in psychology, but I wanted to actually go to med school and be a forensic profiler. I wanted to work with serial killers. I had always been fascinated, and why I study human behavior now, and I see this in athletes, is it's never about what we're doing. It's why we do it. What has always fascinated me is, why do we as human beings do what we do? The what is relative, because it's that, but what on an unconscious level do we do? So I thought serial killers, yes. Why do we do this? Because we're always focused on like the act itself, but why does this happen? But then I did my senior thesis to get into med school on serial killers, and spent 6 months in serial killers' heads. I was like, nah, I'm good. I don't need to do that. So I ended up going to PA school. So I'm PAs here, but physician's assistant. So I have all the rights of a medical doctor, including diagnosing history, taking prescribing, working in hospitals, private care. I just don't have complete autonomy, so I can't get open in my own practice. I spent a lot of my time in emergency trauma medicine, because I love that fast pace and what that was. Did internal medicine and HIV research. And then I was like, okay, what else am I going to do? And around that time, I found CrossFit. I played sport all the way through college. And since I was young, track and field, soccer, I played soccer, and I dove 3 meter and 1 meter springboard in college. I know, looking at me now, you're like, oof, that's a lot of weight to try to move. But when I found CrossFit, it was, I fell in love with it right away. I drank the Kool-Aid, I did all of that. And within 6 months of starting CrossFit, I became a coach. And I also then got my CSCS, which is Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. So it's to be able to work with athletes, you have to have the certification in the States. Since I already knew about anatomy, how that works, I just wanted, I guess, a few more letters after my name, because I didn't have enough. Yeah. And it was as I went through CrossFit and became an athlete through CrossFit, and then started working with other athletes in CrossFit, in a lot within MMA, UFC fighting, that I was spending more of my time around their mental game than I was actually the physical.
Yeah, right.
Because what I found was, I'm like, okay, why isn't this happening? Yes, we can talk about knee drive and this and that and what's happening, but what I was finding is these athletes getting inside their heads, and I'd be at competitions of CrossFit and competing myself, seeing how I would get in my own head and having people do the, scope out of like what's going on and what it is, and see people at times go into full panic anxiety attacks before they're about to step on, and compete. So that's what started really fascinating me. And so I started focusing more on that. So it wasn't that I set out to do sports psych and performance coaching, and it was just I kind of fell into it because I realized more times than not, people's brain got in the way before, or shut down before their physical body.
Yeah. So what is performance anxiety?
Well, it's a lot of things. Performance anxiety is when an individual is set to perform in a fashion. We see this a lot. We can hear like public speaking. Let's look at before we get to that. It's when you have to present yourself in front of other individuals, and our narrative that we create inside our head, or our perception, causes us to have symptoms of anxiety. So heightened heart rate, butterflies in the stomach, negative self-talk, right? So it's where our expectations of something, we create a whole different picture, and we start to get into situations of what Stephen Palmer says, resilience undermining thinking, those ruts. So we get caught in thinking traps around things. And what we do is that in turn, we talk ourselves out of it. And in extreme cases, it can lead to a diagnosis of social anxiety disorder, also known as SAD, but seasonal affective disorder is also known as that. So we'll watch those things. The social anxiety disorder is when someone is diagnosed with where they literally go into full panic anxiety attacks anytime they need to perform in front of a team, in front of judges, in front of an audience, anything like that. So that's where we get from performance anxiety. That's what happens.
And what do you do with your guys, your athletes that you help? What are some ways that you help them with performance anxiety?
What I have found in working with athletes is more times than not, one's performance anxiety or doubts aren't about that actual thing. We have to kind of go back, and we're not talking about for like, your relationship with your parent, that's what we're talking about. But all of our anxieties come from a trigger or a stressor. Something previously has happened where you faltered or failed, by your own definition around performing in something, or we have insecurities because of something, because the narrative we found, and it now our brain looks to protect ourselves. So what I think a great place to start is we have to remember our brain only cares about one thing. That's our survival. It doesn't care how much weight we lift. It doesn't care how fast we run. It doesn't care how well we fight. It cares about our survival. And when we get put into a threat response, and what I mean by that is when we start to, something is presented to us that's a stressful situation, performing, right? Our brain is like, okay, hold on, what's going on? Because the brain can't tell between a perceived threat and an actual threat. So what do I mean by that? Well, whether you think someone's gonna pull a gun on you or they actually do pull a gun on you, your brain's gonna react the same way. So when we get into situations around performance, let's look at, where we look at lifting, right? If there is a narrative for ourselves that we've created, if we're triggered by something, whether it's other athletes around us, something that's happened when we were younger because we got injured, right? And you're worried about whether your knee will hold up or something like that. Our brain goes, hold on, we're in a threat response. And what I see is that people try then to rationalize, or what we call emotion and reason with themselves. And we have to remember this, our brain cannot multitask. So what do I mean? I know some people listening or watching this are going to be like, what do you mean? I do it all the time. No, what you do is task switch. So we're talking semantics. Yes, you could have multiple tasks or multiple cues being given to you. But what we do is called task switching. A little here, a lot here, a little here, a lot here. And the human brain is not designed to give its full attention to a number of items at the same time. So what we see in performance anxiety and what's happening a lot of the time is athletes are trying to remember every single cue that their coach has ever told them in the history of lifting, right? And along with that, looking at all their competitors at once. So the brain, unless we say, hold up, I'm just going to focus on this. Or I know that my left hip, turns out I need to be turning that in. If we give ourselves specific cues that we can focus on one at a time, it calms that threat response. So in other words, we ask our brain to do a lot of things it technically isn't designed for. It's designed to adapt. So we do a decent job at multitasking or that task switching, but it isn't what the brain is designed to do. So what we have to see is when we go into things and when I work with athletes is one, we usually have to find, okay, where does this start from? And we take it frame by frame. So, okay, we're gonna focus on this. So if I'm working with an athlete and they're scared of squatting for whatever reason, okay? Well, I know that Shania has told you, watch your knee drive, make sure it's driving over the toe. But yeah, she's told you also to keep your chest up and do this. I just want you to focus on one thing. Let's just focus on that knee drive, of course that. So then our brain becomes comfortable with that situation and we're able to move past that stressor, past that trigger. So that's a really key thing is first and foremost, finding out what this trigger is that's causing you all this anxiety around things. I'll start there, but then also teaching athletes how to focus on one thing at a time so that we don't become overwhelmed with it.
Are athletes usually aware of what their triggers are, or do you have to do a little digging first?
Oh, I have to dig like nobody's business. Most of the time what I'll have is people come to me and they'll want to worry about the acute response. So as it's the same thing in physiology, it's what's happening right then and there. It's like, okay, every time I go to a meet or this, I start to doubt or I tense up or I do this. And they want a fix of that acute response. Now, I can give some techniques, some cognitive behavioral therapies that'll do it, but it never solves the problem. So what I have to do after I usually have the first session with them and hear about where they started, I go back, I start asking questions. And usually, I have a good track record. During that first session, I find out where it actually stems from. And more times than not, when I then point it out and say, well, what do we think about this? Could this lead into that? Then they're like, oh my God, you're right. I did this, and this. And when you're able to address it and embrace what that is, then we can look at the acute responses to things. The acute response actually usually gets cleaned up by figuring out where it started, right? And so the same thing, we can compare it to what you and Shania do. Like if there's an issue with a certain thing, the way someone's moving, usually it has something to do with something completely else. And then once you fix that background, right, is you have to realize, oh, okay, it's gonna fix what's immediate right now. So those are the things that I see is usually I have to go back and dig a little bit to find what it is. Because when we have triggers or stressors, our brain looks to defend us from them. So people have walls about them. They won't think about them. They're not front of mind with it.
Interesting. And I guess when you figure out those triggers with the athletes, you give them homework and stuff to work on during the sessions and outside of the sessions?
Absolutely. Here's the thing. Everyone says, well, you have to consciously do it. Absolutely. But we have to remember, 95% of all our decisions are made in our unconscious brain, our emotional brain. So pretty much every decision we have around something has an emotional undertone to it. Now that 5% and that smart brain, that prefrontal cortex, listen, it has a lot of veto power. And we've all said to ourselves, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to change up this, and this is what I'm going to do. And then we do that for a couple of days, but then we're like, ugh, this is too hard. I'm not doing this anymore, right? And it goes back to that why. See, the what comes from, okay, this is what I'm going to do. That comes from up here. The why means, how do we get our unconscious brain on board? Because our unconscious brain is constantly searching for threats. Our whole brain as a whole, but that's where our threat response is, our limbic system, our primal brain. So it's always looking, what are we doing and why are we doing something? That's why when we're performing and we're doing these, we have to ask yourself, all right, I know what I have to do, but why am I doing it? Why do I lift? Why am I gonna be changing the way that I move? What I'm gonna focus, because then what happens is our brain can see the benefits of doing something the new way. And that goes down to our brain needing certainty. If our brain doesn't have certainty, it's happy to create it for us. And that's what we see in performance anxiety, is more times than not, we don't know what's going to happen at the meet. We're not going to know what's going to happen at a competition. So we start to form what I call the Harry Potter narrative, an 8-movie saga of all the fantastical things that are going to happen, right? And it's catastrophizing. It's like, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to do this. And I saw this thing on IG, and this one person I'm going up, and we create it. Now, is it helpful? Absolutely not. But our brain thinks it's helpful because we have given ourselves some sort of context, right? Yeah. And what we know is more times than not, those things don't happen. Or if they do, it's because we've actually talked ourselves into them happening. And we have to remember that perception is projection. So whatever we think of in this little coconut of ours, that's what we're going to put out. Now, I want to acknowledge that severe anxiety disorders, if we're talking about PTSD and things of that nature, it's not just about, I'm not saying it's all about our perception of how we do things, but when we look at performance anxiety, it's not ranking up there in those complex disorders, things of that nature. It a lot of the time is about our perception of things, because our brain is lazy. It only works on roughly about 12 volts. There's light bulbs that put out more energy, right? And it's always looking for a simple environment. And so when we have to do something new, it means we have to put out a lot of energy. So think about it. When you have to learn something new and study, or you've never done something, we have to give our focus to it, right? And so we do it a number of times, and we start to see the benefit of the way that we're doing it. But if our brain doesn't immediately see the benefit of the way to do something new, it will go kicking and screaming. And our perception falls under how we deal with anxiety. Yeah, that makes sense. And what do I mean by that? Our brain, as I said, is lazy, and it uses a number of the same physiological functions for different emotions. So let's look at something like anxiety and excitement. Both, what happens during them? Butterflies in the stomach, maybe rapid heartbeat, right? Shortness of breath, uncertainty. What we also know is that if you become too excited, it can make you anxious. And it's a fine line between the two. And what's the difference between the two? Well, our perception. Getting anxious over something versus getting excited over something really is how we view that event. Is it an actual threat, or is it something that we enjoy? So if our brain is just left to its own devices, right, it will always choose a negative route, because, well, we're a negative bias being. Our brain inherently looks for the negative before it looks for the positive. So we'll always look for the things that are going to go wrong, unless we say, hold up, no. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I know it. We're fine. And or we can relate it back to something positive that's similar to that situation. So it comes down to, when we're dealing with this, it's how we're viewing it, our perception of what is going on.
Interesting. So we've got two other athletes in the room, and I wanted to hear their takes on how they personally deal with performance anxiety around competition.
Please do. I can shut my mouth.
What about you? So Steve, how do you deal with performance anxiety around competition What's your personal go-tos?
I use a lot of self-talk. I always have. That's something I've always done. I visualize a lot of things before I step on the platform as well. I think if you've seen me compete, I take my time. Like I just let everything kind of just go back down to zero, and then I just do what I've done in training. As Ty said, like I think about literally almost nothing on the platform. I've done it that many times in training that I can't change a thing.
Yeah.
I'm literally not going to change anything. Like I think the one thing I think about on squat is just hit depth.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to load something on my back that's ridiculous and I'm not going to be able to stand back up with it. So I just need to hit a competition standard and then I'm good. Bench and deadlift are the same. Like I just calm myself down. I just do what I do in training. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
Training is all just leading up to this one performance that we're going to do. You know, we have 9 lifts on that day. I'm going to squat 1,000 times in a prep. I don't need to overthink it on that one day just because it's a specific date.
Yeah. What type of self-talk methods do you use?
A lot of it's just motivational stuff, like just knowing that I'm capable of doing something. An easy one for me is like, I'll take something in competition that I've done in training a million times too. Well, not a million times, like I've done it before. So I know for a fact that I can do it. Yeah. Rather than reaching for this number that exceeds anything I've ever done.
Yeah.
Because as soon as I start to do that, like I know the kind of feeling I had in training and like when I took that number for the first time, would be far too much for me to be able to hit a competition standard, do it in front of people, do it after a weight cut, do it under all these other variables. So I always just go for a number that I've already hit in training.
Yeah.
That way, like it's going to be better than the last time I did in competition. Competition and training are different. I know some people think you should be stronger on the platform all the time, but there's so many different variables you're not accounting for.
Yeah.
So the way that I know it's not really self-talk, but it's more like I've convinced myself I can do it because I've done it.
Yeah.
And there's just no way that I'll miss.
That's awesome. What about you, Shania?
I'm pretty similar. Like I'm pretty routine. So I definitely like use music a lot, like in training and on competition. So I have like specific songs that I'll play before squat, before bench, before deadlift, and that pretty much stays the same both in training and on competition day. And then just using one cue. So I just tell myself and repeat it for like a different cue for squat, bench, and deadlift every single time. And same, like similar to Steve, and that's one of the things I've learned from him is just like using comp day to like showcase what you've done in training. So the more you kind of like bring to training, I guess, the better result you're going to have on comp day, especially because we train pretty much every day of our lives. And a competition day is like 3, maybe 4 times a year. So just like approaching everything the same.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one that both of you bring to the energy.
The other thing too, though, is powerlifting's predictable. We know what we have to do. If we look at like fighters, like Ty was talking about before, you have another person you're up against.
Yeah.
You don't know what they're going to do. That's a completely different ball game out there.
Yeah.
Like what we do is we are bursting the same thing every single session. So we're just doing it on repeat. We just go out and then just go and do that. If we had to go out and like you have this whole other person in front of you, that's a whole other variable. That's something that's not predictable whatsoever.
Yeah. So keep going, Ty.
Yeah, no, that's what you find too, because when our brain has certainty, as you know, as Steve was just saying there, you know, it's predictable, it's what it is, you know, both. I love that talking about we focus on one thing, one cue. It gives our brain certainty. If our brain has certainty, then it doesn't spiral out of control on things. When we're looking at self-talk, it's those thinking patterns that we can fall into, those negative thinking patterns. And unfortunately, if you're an athlete that performs in individual sports versus team sports, you're actually more likely to experience anxiety.
Yeah.
Because what you have from a team aspect is people being able to boost you up. And even though, yes, you're part of, let's say, the per promotion team, and you have these people hyping you up, it's still just you on that platform. So the fact of being able to not focus and, you know, kind of not think about much, but as Steve said, you know, all I got to worry about is hitting depth. Everything else is going to come into play. And we hear that thing about fake it till you make it, but it really comes down to it. we need a certain amount of worry, right, to perform. But what can happen is and with that is that physical arousal. Yes, that's our adrenals, our adrenal glands kicking into gear. We need that. However, when we allow it to run rampant, that's when we shift within our pattern of things, and it turns into, well, something that you don't want. And it's about, being able to tell yourself, I've done this 1,000 times, and the only thing that's different, well, there's going to be someone else that I don't know in front of me saying, yep, good lift, of things that nothing changes. And if we allow ourselves to create that little comfort zone, because we as human beings do not like to be uncomfortable, whether physically or mentally. So if we allow ourselves to find some sort of comfort within the discomfort, so we all hear this a million times, right? Learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah. Our brain has certainty, so it's along for the ride.
I think one of the biggest things that both Shania and Steve just said then is mindset within training will reflect on the platform.
Absolutely.
So I think that's probably one of the big take homes.
Yeah, I think just like doing everything to comp standard, whether it's like training or on comp day, because it's like the judges are like an external factor, they're a variable that you can't control. So if you're doing it to standard in training, you just basically repeat that on platform. Yeah. Whereas I think like some athletes don't do that.
Yeah, no, they don't. They get nitpicky on their own stuff, or they don't have their mindset on in training, mucking around XYZ, which is okay sometimes.
It is, yeah. But I think having the ability to like be like to analyze and know when something's not done to comp standard, and like you're allowed to do that. A lot of people are afraid to do that as well.
Yeah, definitely. All right, social media. So social media is a big one now, and people comparing themselves or watching other lifters on social media or other athletes in general on social media is pretty a big bit of a problem. What is your take on all of that?
For me?
Yeah.
Well, here's the first and foremost. We as human beings are built to judge and compare, and anyone, this is my opinion, anyone who says no judgment is lying. Why? Because it is literally in our DNA to judge and compare. Every time we walk down the street, we interact with someone, whatever it is, we judge. Now, I do want to acknowledge the level of judgment or comparison doesn't necessarily affect the outcome of the situation. But for us to tell ourselves, oh, we can't compare, oh, I don't judge, it's just what we do. Yeah. Now, then turn that into platforms of social media, from whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Meta, whatever you want to call it, right? We have to remember we only see the highlights. Very rarely do we ever see people failing. It's like, we're going to post our PB, we're going to do this. And everything can be manipulated. I was talking to a friend in the States who is an elite CrossFitter, and was at training and saw someone load up weights that was above what their PB actually is, take a picture, right, and post it and say, yes, who just hit a new PB? And then because of the angle of the camera, like it was the first picture was that, and then a video of them doing actually something that was 20 kilos lighter. However, and then of course, on the comments, oh, so amazing, blah, blah, blah. No one's going to know except at the gym. And he had seen that, didn't say anything, because at the end of the day, he's going to be screwed if he goes to competition and tries to do that. But we only see people's highlights. Now, I'm saying that everyone does that. That's just an example of this is what happens. And people, everything's a variable, right? What if someone hits that PB, they're hitting these weights, and their nutrition's on point, their sleep is on point, their training has been all these type of things, versus someone, oh, I didn't sleep as well last night, I didn't fuel the way that I was supposed to. So it is healthy for us to compare. It is in our DNA, way back in our caveman, cavewoman, cave gender non-conforming days, right? We compared ourselves. Am I stronger than this other person? How do I fit into my tribe? Am I an attractive mate? I want to acknowledge we've changed the narrative to an extent, but that's what we do. So when we look at ourselves in competition and we know that someone's in our weight class, say with this, or we're going to have to go against them or whatever it is, we then start to nitpick and find all the things wrong with ourselves. And it goes to that negative thought pattern of, okay, well, I don't do that. I can't lift that much weight. I need this. This is what's going to happen. And so what do? On top of all the other things, we stop trading, as you know, both Shania and Steve said, the way we would in competition or have that mindset, into then full panic mode of comparing ourselves. So we have to remember that it's fine. It's healthy. It really is healthy to be like, you know what? I know that person's in my weight class. They're hitting that number. Good for them.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's like you said earlier, Ty, like perception is everything. So it's like, if you perceive like comparison, or if like there's somebody in the same weight class as you who's like obviously stronger than you, depending how you perceive that. So like you can either use that as like, okay, I'm just going to work harder to get better than them and be stronger than them, or you're just going to stop and like give up at the end of the day. One of the two options. Yeah. Or start nitpicking.
And nitpicking. And what you can do for yourself when you find those thought patterns, we call them thinking traps, right? Ask yourself a few questions. One, is this helping me or harming me? Is this helping me reach my goal? Is there a different way I can think about this? And here's the big one, which people don't usually like to do, but is the way I'm thinking, I already said that one. Is there another way I can think about it? And am I doing anything to harm myself during this? It's about us taking accountability. And I think it goes back into those variables, as you were talking about, Shania, with, the judge is an external variable. Did they calibrate the scale correctly? Is it this? Is it that? We inherently will look for all the things that we cannot control.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is acknowledge things that I'm not telling anyone on here, or I never tell an athlete, I'm not telling you to not acknowledge things that are negative or things that are out of our control. What I'm saying is cool, I see you, but you don't get my energy. What gets my energy is what can I control? What I say, think, feel, or do. And I have a phrase that's called, what's my 50%? Every time you go into a competition, you are doing something, you only have 50% of it. You don't have 100% of it. Why? Because the other 50% is all the other things that can happen. It's too hot in the gym that you're at. You don't know the judge. The judge has friends who are competing. The scales aren't calibrated. My belt in the middle of the thing popped off. So-and-so did this. Someone's cycling, or they're cheating. You only have 50%. So if you allow yourself to say, you know what, I have my 50% when it comes to it, the other things, because then what you do when you have that, you can then influence what is around you. You can then compensate for other things because you've prepared yourself. You know that your 50% is up to par. And people are like, well, doesn't that go against having to give 110%? I'm not talking about effort. I'm talking about accountability with that. So it's a really great thing to, what's my 50%? This is what I can control.
Do you have any tips or tricks for the Insta scrollers?
Yeah, stop.
Unfollow.
No.
I love that.
All afternoon scrolling and watching all the powerlifters.
Here's the thing, and all three of you, I ask you, how many times do you find yourself just what it's called zombie scrolling, that you just go, and I'm just going to use this platform, like, you don't even know what you're looking for, right? We become such a thought pattern of, it just becomes that, oh, I see someone kind of lifting, I don't know what they're doing, that, or we become fixated on a person. And so, because we know they're in our weight class, or there'll be competition for us.
Yeah.
I tell people this, before you go scrolling, before you go picking up your phone, right? Ask yourself, why am I doing this? Whenever we're doing it, I do this with people because obviously I don't just work in sports psych, I work in organizational psychology as well, and dealing with people with the pandemic and mental health and things of that nature. And I always say, before you pick up your phone, when you just had it in your hand, why are you going to do this? What are you searching for? Because if we don't know what we're searching for, then we're just getting panicked. And if it's like, you know what, I want to see if, and I'm using Steve, like, I know that Steve is in my weight class. It isn't. He isn't, because I'm a fatty. No. But I'm just saying, so I know that he lifts, my class. Why am I going to look at his lifts? Is there a reason? I'm like, I'm going to see where he's at. Okay, cool. But why? It always comes down to the why. So when I tell people where they're looking for social media, before you go into, and if you're going to a site because you want to learn how to mobilize, fine, but you would find yourself not picking up your phone as much if you actually ask yourself, okay, what am I about to look for? Why am I going to do it? And to your point, instead of mucking around, right, have a list for yourself of these are the cues that I know I need to hit.
Yeah.
Do I feel I made that accomplishment here on this lift? Yes. Okay, cool. What else could I be looking at? If you're looking at that video that you've taken of yourself, right? So my cues with that, and my biggest one is ask yourself, why am I actually doing this? And is this serving my purpose to what it is? And if it's a no, don't do it. And we have, because this is just going to send me into a tirade, because we've all been there, right? We're in the middle of practice and we see someone that we know that lifts like us and they lifted more than us. What are we thinking about the whole entire time you go up to the next lift? And it's not that motivation. I think, yes, you can use it as a motivation, so Shania was saying, but it shouldn't become your sole purpose.
Yeah, not at all. No. How do you ever deal with any athletes who are the under aroused? The ones who say, it's okay, I don't mind, or like,
yeah, absolutely.
What do you, how do you deal with them?
It goes back to, most of the time that I see people are under aroused or they do this sort of things, it goes back to the trigger. They form the narrative as like, well, I didn't even really want to do this anyway. So it's just, if I just hit this, there's nothing at stake. Meh. That's because if we set what we do, it's called back to emotional reasoning. If we set our standards very low, right? If we don't hit them, then what people will say is, then I won't be upset about it. And it's a protection. All that is a protection mechanism. It's okay to say, you know what? I want to go out there and crush this. I want to, hit these numbers. I want to do this. But again, why do you want to do it? People who stay in that narrative of things, it goes back to the age-old question, why are you even doing this? Why do you lift? Why do you compete in fighting? Why do you compete in CrossFit? Why are you an athlete? And if it's just that, I just want to have fun. Okay, you can have fun. But how we drive ourselves for motivators is, again, saying, no, it's okay for me to be excited about this. It's okay for me to, if I falter, that I pick myself up. People think when we talk about resilience, right? Being a resilient athlete, things of that nature, that it's just about enduring and that it's about bouncing back. Okay, tenacity, absolutely, it's part of it. But when we're looking to perform, and how I try to help people who underperform, but also, get over aroused, is resilience and resilient mindsets and that enhancing thinking isn't just about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward. It's about seeing, okay, you know what? I didn't like what happened here, but this I really liked, and let's take it with us. Because I'd be happy, to hear from Shania and Steve around, if a lift doesn't go as planned, more times than not, what do you focus on? The things that all went wrong, or the things that you did good about the lift?
Shit.
Yeah.
Shit.
Right? You could have had the most beautiful upper body stature, all this other stuff, and all of a sudden your knees didn't go where they went. And what is the whole entire thing when you re-rack that bar?
I feel like
I can't believe I did. It's right.
I feel like it can depend on like what level you're at and what stage you're at. Like probably for Steve, especially because he's been powerlifting for so long, it's like if he misses a lift based on just like not being strong enough for it, that's fine. Yeah. But if it's like technically like because he's been powerlifting for so long and it's like the same movement over and over again, that's when you kind of like, fuck this, that was shit. Like technically kind of get frustrated. Yeah. That's probably
so it follows us, but more times than not, what do we see regardless? And it does this based on experience, but to an extent it's, we will just focus because that's how we're designed on all the things that are negative. Instead of being like, all right, you know what? I did do that, but all this other stuff was really good. Cool. Then our brain sees the benefit. So even if we're under aroused of it, it's about getting excited, of, you know what did I do right? These are the things that I did right. Because listen, nothing I say no podcast, motivational speaker, sports psychologist, no one will ever get rid of a human being's negative bias. It is ingrained in us. It's the reason why we're still alive today. We need it, but it skews our perception. But what we get to do is form those new neural pathways, those little squiggly lines that we see deep down, for that to be our go-to. Be like, oh, okay, yes, this wasn't great, but what did I do right? Because then what it trains our brain to do is look for the positive or the opportunity going forward.
I think I've noticed that is one of the main differences between Steve and other athletes. I remember when we first, when he first started lifting with us here, you had 270 on your back for a double that day, and you missed it. Remember? And what he said to me was, I was just happy to have 270 on my back for a double.
Yeah.
I was like, I really respected that response, because other athletes would have been like, nah, fucked it. Internet.
Yeah.
What?
Hello, you there?
I think it's Steve.
I'm here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think Steve's internet just dropped out.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought that was an awesome response from him.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It's about, there's a catch-22. It's kind of a catch-22, right? The longer you do something, it's awesome because you become more experienced. You become more comfortable being uncomfortable. However, what we then form a narrative for ourselves is we should be better than where we're at. Okay, cool. That's fair, right? But we have to start celebrating, and it is those little things of what is going on, right? What I miss?
He just looks like a child.
Who, me?
No,
Okay.
Steve.
Oh, Steve, oh, yeah. Oh, there it is. It is. Oh, okay. Yeah, and so I did. It's and it's one of those type of things where we have to be able to say, you know what? If you'll go back to that, I'm just happy this is on my back.
Yeah.
We have to realize that, you know, if you're at 270 kilos, you literally have the ability to lift something up, like go down, lift something up that a majority of people do not have.
Yeah.
That's, you know, you were able to do these things, and even if it was like at 200, whatever it is, like we have to celebrate those type of things. It doesn't mean like, haha, I'm better than you because, you know, I can, but it's like, wow, I'm literally seeing what the human body, because listen, we as human beings inherently don't throw ourselves under. We don't be like, ooh, let me go and put, you know, 270 kilos on my back. Like, that's not what we're driven to do. Actually, it's the reverse. It's we're going to avoid a threat. And now what we have to be able to do is like, oh, well, I really get to do this. I have been able to adapt my body and its abilities and its physiology, like to utilize it in its utmost, you know, level of things. So that's where we help ourselves with performance anxiety and be like, you know what? I might not make this, but I'm going to get pretty damn close. Yeah. And it will just build from there. We have to remember that sometimes we need to go back to where the beginning started. If you think you know everything, you think it is, go back to where you started. And sometimes it is about, you know what? I'm just going to do bar work. And I see this a lot of experienced athletes, and I'm taking this, and I'm newer to powerlifting, but I spent over 12 years in CrossFit. I would see a lot of elite level CrossFitters go right back to the basics, doing body weight workouts, hopping on and just doing stuff with the bar, technique drills with the bar, because it reminds you of those little things, those things that you just take for granted. But then as we find as things go on, we don't even think about it anymore because we think, oh, I don't need to. That's for a beginner. Well, if you think you know everything, go back to the start. For a few days, go back to, you know what, I'm not going to load up. And I get you have to find that for timing because leading up to competitions and things like that. But I've even seen that, right? Or if you're doing a deload week, throw in some of, you know what, I'm just going to put a bar on my back and really hone where I need to be. Feel those little itty bitty accessory muscles that I don't feel as much anymore when I got 270 on my back or that I'm pushing through, so that you reconnect the purpose of everything that's going on. When the more experience we get at times, the cockier we can become. Fair. And I think that you need that kind of confidence. But then what happens is when we don't revisit where we started, then we don't remind ourselves of certain triggers that we had around performance itself.
Interesting. Going back to that response from Steve about the 270, Steve, did you train yourself to have those type of positive responses? Because it's not the first time that you've had a positive response from an outcome that other people may have perceived as something negative. Do you train did you go through a process where you used to go negative and you've had to bring yourself back to positive, or has that always been you?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I've never really trained myself to do it. It kind of just happened over time.
Yeah,
I
right.
guess. Like, I love working hard. So if I've put something that's too much, I guess, in my hands, then that's kind of on me and I can't blame anything else.
Yeah.
So that's where I have like same as when I took 300.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
So when I took 300 that time as well, it was like, even though I missed, I was happy that I gave it absolutely fucking everything that I had in my like whole being to try and stand back up. Like the bar was literally pushing me back down while I was trying to stand up.
Yeah.
So that was the positive out of that. Like it wasn't just like I got halfway, this is heavy, and then I just like dropped, like you see a lot of people do. It was like I was still trying to stand up as the boys had to take the bar off my back. And that was big for me, just to be like, yeah, I still have that mentality and that attitude where I just won't stop fighting.
Do you have to talk yourself, the self-talk that you do you ever say to yourself, if I miss it, then I'm just happy I've got it? Like, I'm just happy I tried? Or does that just...
No.
Okay.
No. I never think about missing in like when I'm talking to myself or anything. I never think about not getting something. I just think about not stopping.
Yeah. So you just think that this being able to take the positives out of any experience is just experience with lifting in general.
Yeah, and you need to fail to know as well. Like I could have got it, and then I would have just tried to be just as happy. Really, I probably would have been happier, and I would have posted on social media. But I was just the same.
Yeah.
Even though I missed it, I was still the same with myself. I still felt the same because I would have tried just as hard if I got it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so Ty, with the coach-athlete relationship, what are some things that the coach can do or help with when they do have athletes who might have performance anxiety or be scrollers or not be in a good mindset or a positive mindset with their training?
Ask questions without, I would like to say ask questions without judgment, but guess what? We all judge, right? What it is when I talk to coaches and they'll ask me, I have this athlete that I want you to see, but what can I do with it? One, this whole narrative of I've seen you do it, you can do it. Okay, awesome, right? But it's about, all right, what's going on for you? If they're failing on a squat, right? And it's still the same, the consistency. It's asking, what are you thinking when you are getting down that low?
Yep.
Are you thinking about standing up? Are you thinking about what is? And if they say, well, I'm thinking about, tracking my knees and I'm this and this, that, wheel it back to it.
Yeah.
What I tell coaches when they have people who are overwhelmed, let's not get into social media yet, but they're doing it, is bring it back to one cue. Even your most experienced athletes, because even then they'll still have this whole narrative of, I got to remember this and this and this and this. The coach is going to know the thing that is the most direct issue, right? So it's like, it was all those things. What is the number one issue that was either going to hurt them or put them in a compromising position, whatever that may be?
Yeah.
Have them focus on that. What coaches need to sometimes do, especially say if coaches aren't athletes, it doesn't mean that you don't have the most amazing coaches who didn't compete or they're former, but you have to realize that it's all well and fine to say, you can do it. I've seen you do this a million times. Stop, get out of your fucking head. Cool. But that doesn't really help the narrative. The support is awesome, but it's about asking, okay, what are you thinking about? So about, coaching Shania, I'm like, what do you think about during your bench? And Shania's like, well, it's this and this and that. Cool. what is the most uncomfortable part of it? Well, it's this and this. All right. What don't you like about, the descent on something, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And then that coach can say, all right, all I want you to do, forget everything else, right? If you got to strip back the weight, you strip back the weight, whatever. Everything else, we're just going to focus on that one aspect. Allow a central nervous system, that threat response, to calm down.
Yeah.
And also, it's about just saying, hey, if you miss it, you miss it. We're going to learn something new from it.
Yeah.
Right. And that, yes, it's that pep talk, it's those type of things, but I never subscribe to the narrative. And I get it, right? But that whole like athletes like slapping themselves like this, doing all this other stuff, I get it, hyping it up. But what we've found and what I've seen in some of the most elite athletes, and when I was working with fighters and things like that, and they come out and they're like, bruh. Before that, they are the calmest, most focus of what is going on. They are running things through their mind. They've watched hours and hours, thousands of hours of their opponent and watching how they move. And yes, there's still that uncertainty, but they know if they come in, there's going to be a hook. But then, because it's also that hype mentality, they do it, but that's not where their strength is coming from. The strength is about saying, okay, this is what I'm going out, this is what I'm setting out to do. Steve's point earlier, get on that platform saying, you know what, I'm just gonna make sure I hit depth. Everything else is gonna be a little bit gravy. And if it comes down to these little things, and if you mess up technique-wise, acknowledge it. Cool, I'm not telling you that you shouldn't, but then move past it because it's done. And what people have to realize is there's a difference between, and what coaches have to realize, and they have to talk to their athletes about, is rumination versus reflection. A lot of the time I'll see coaches really ruminate with their athletes. So what do I mean by that? Focus on all the things that you did wrong. Yeah, it was this, and I remember all this, as opposed to going back and revisiting it and reflecting on it. Asking the athlete, what do you think you did right?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't do anything right. No, I'll try again. Well, it's this. Yeah, I did this. Cool. All right. What do you think needs work? And then that's where the focus doesn't become, because you've already primed the brain to look at those things that were positive. And so you can, getting also out, coaches getting, like I said, athletes to reflect and not ruminate on things.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think too, like, you've got to almost let some athletes find their own way as well. Like, also just, like, less is more sometimes too.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Like, I used to get really frustrated after like lifts if I missed them, like especially bench. And then it was like, I just kind of had to find my feet in a sense of like not doing that anymore, and just having a coach who kind of didn't really say or give much, especially if I was just like, I'm frustrated, I don't want anything, like, can we just like leave it be kind of thing. So like as well, like that can kind of be one of the best things a coach can do, is just let an athlete figure their own way out in a sense of dealing with their fails or their successes and what that looks like, instead of kind of just overloading and kind of overstimulating.
I think you bring up a great point, Shania. It's about sometimes, it goes back to asking questions. So if someone missed a lift, like one of your athletes missed a lift, and you can see that frustration, it's asking, do you want me to say anything, or you good? Yeah. And, give them that option. And if they're like, oh, okay, what? Or, or it's not right now. And the coach will be like, okay, I'll jot it down. No worries.
Yep.
Let me know what it is, Unless it's something they're in a position that is completely going to compromise them, and be like, okay, I know you didn't want anything, but just be weary of this because I don't want you hurting your back or your knee or your, if it's going to put them in. But otherwise, it's just like, all right, you don't want my 2 cents. You're like, I got like 20 cents, but no, I won't, we'll just let it go. And we'll talk about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're just about up with time, but before we finish, Ty, did you want to give yourself a little bit of a plug on how some of our athletes can get in touch with you if they want to come and have a chat?
Yeah, my schedule is now open up. If you want, just send an email, hit me up at freaksuccess.com. I have the privilege that I'm working with a number of athletes right now from promotion. And we'll get started on it. IG is Ty Vincent Sparvero. It's my name. And that's my plug. It's really a bad plug on that. But Ty,
Okay.
I know the website's up and, up under construction of that. I'm trying to be, get on top of those type of things. But yeah, Ty at freaksuccess.com. Shoot me an email. Tell me what's going on. What I do in person, if you're here in Brisbane. If not, I do tons of virtual. I still work with athletes and people in the States where I'm from. So yeah, hit me up and we'll get you all sorted. I know States is coming up here soon and all the state qualifiers, et cetera, et cetera. Or if you're up for promotion and you know what it is, just talk to your Kelly, Shania, they'll know how to get in touch with me.
Cool. Thanks very much for coming on today, Ty. That was awesome. We had a great time.
What are you two freaking frack there?
Seriously.
Steve's like, sure, let's go there. We got freaking bad. Like, what is this? I'm like, I'm sitting there like, all there. I'm like, this mock crew right now. All right. Thanks so much, everybody.